Okay, so it's been a while now since we've done one of these Bleach character analysis videos, a deep dive look into a particular character from Bleach's wonderful and eclectic cast. And this time, against all odds, you guys voted for it to be one of Ichigo's closest allies and best friends in the entire series, Sado Yasutora, also known as Chad. Now, in that poll I put out, Chad was going up against heavy hitters like Rukia and Orihime, and the fact that he came out on top, there's something heartwarming about that, as Chad really is the definition of Bleach's underdog, often struggling for any kind of a victory throughout the series, to the point where his track record became something of a joke. And I think many of us have always felt a desire to see Chad done some kind of justice, and I'm guessing that's why he won here, because there really is a lot to say about this guy. He's a really interesting and unique character. Much is the curse of Bleach in so many ways, as I've mentioned in the past. You look beyond, you look through the forest of characters and you'll still find someone who is as interesting and has so much to give as Chad. However, unlike many characters we've talked about on this channel in the past, Chad is truly the first, I would say, certainly among the character analysis playlist, who is by definition a main character. Now, you might, question that when you see his impact on the plot or lack thereof, but truly I would put him among the upper echelon of main cast of characters. I mean, he's literally one of Ichigo's best friends. He's there pretty much from the beginning right until the very end. So I'm actually really interested to dive into this, and I think because of that it's probably going to be a fairly lengthy video, so let's get things going. But before we begin the video properly, guys, if you haven't hit subscribe yet, make sure to do that now. We are now less than 5,000 subs away from 100,000 subscribers. So if you want to be part of that final 5k push, hit the button now. For Bleach content like this every single week, I would, of course, very much appreciate it. And if you want to help support the video a little bit more, you can always give it a thumbs up if you enjoyed it, because it does give it more exposure, it helps it out on YouTube, and it gets it out to more Bleach fans like yourselves. And that would just be amazing as well. And if you want to take that support from me a little step further, we do also have a Patreon for the channel as well, where you can get videos like this one early, and you can support me there for as little as $1 a month. And to everyone who's already doing that, whose names are up on the screen, I give you a massive and heartfelt thank you. So, where do you begin a video on truly one of the main cast of characters in Bleach, even if Chad's impact on the story overall is minimal, for lack of a better word? He still features an awful lot. There's still quite a lot to go through. So, Chad's manga lifespan stretches all the way from chapter 7, we're talking single-digit chapters here, right the way through to, of course, what used to be the finale of the series, 686. He does not make an appearance in the, well, I guess the quote-unquote first chapter of this supposed Hell arc, although whether we get any more or not is still up in the air. But he's not the only one of Ichigo's friends to not appear in that chapter, so it's not that big of a deal. So really then, Chad does make an appearance throughout. He is a constant throughout the entire story. He appears in every single story arc, every single, sub-arc within those story arcs. Chad makes an appearance as well. But there is definitely something about Chad. There is a bit of an elephant in the room with this character that I think we probably should address before we dive into his appearance, his personality, his plot overview, etc., etc. And that is what I've named the Chad problem. Because this character undeniably suffers from a serious problem going through the series. And as I was kind of doing a bit of a research before this video, it's a problem that really only makes itself known as you kind of get into the Arrancar arc. So, when the story begins, each of Ichigo's very close friends fills a specific role to Ichigo himself, as both a character and an actual literary device. And Ichigo's whole very close-knit friend group is made up of a bunch of misfits, essentially, fantasy trope. None of them really fit in anywhere, and they all come together because they are great friends. Orihime is, of course, the token girl in that group, but she's also the healer. She's incredibly upbeat most of the time. And then, of course, she does have the romantic connection to Ichigo as well. Then you have Uryu Ishida, cold, calculating, somewhat emotionally distant from the rest of the group, but you know he does care about them regardless, but he's very intelligent, very sort of self-sufficient, you know. In many ways, a lot of these characters kind of rely on Ichigo. Uryu has always been the kind of antithesis, see what I did there, to that, and has been able to stand on his own 2 feet, I guess. He is very much a foil to Ichigo. That's kind of the whole point of Uryu's character. He is the perfect foil to Ichigo. Ichigo is rash, reckless, selfless. Uryu is very much the opposite of that. He won't make a move unless he's calculated it in the first place. Like I said, he comes across very distant, and that kind of foil, that mirroring, is reflected also in their parents as well. And then you have Chad, who is the gentle giant, quiet, very, very physically powerful, the bruiser of the group, essentially, but also, perhaps most importantly, Ichigo's best friend. He is supposed to be Ichigo's closest confidant. He's supposed to be the guy who always has his back in a fight. And the Chad problem really stems from the narrowing of his relevance to Ichigo. And that's something that you really feel throughout the story. The main problem Chad faces, in my opinion, is Uryu. Uryu's growing relevance, not just to the plot, but also to Ichigo as well, really pushes Chad out big time throughout the story. Those big moments that Ichigo has as a character that he probably really should be experiencing with his best friend are nearly always experienced with Uryu. That critical moment on top of the dome, he's with Uryu. Chad is nowhere to be seen. In the Lost Agent arc, it's Uryu who is still on Ichigo's side by the end. Chad has had his mind well and truly warped by Tsukishima, but it's Uryu who arrives in that moment of desperation. And so, you know, Chad, there is less and less of room for him in the series the more Uryu grows in prominence. And this is something that becomes very noticeable, I find, particularly in the Arrancar arc. Kubo tries his best, I think, to keep the characters relatively equal, and I'm talking about all of Ichigo's friends here. There are obviously periphery characters who join the friendship group as the story goes on, you know, Ganju, Nell, etc., but the core cast, Kubo tries his best to keep equal. And the reason I'm bringing this up in such detail and giving it such prominence in this video is because it really hurt Chad throughout the story, to the point where he became something of a running joke. Chad's only remaining role, because Uryu is already the foil and essentially became the best friend. As far as I'm concerned, Uryu is Ichigo's best friend by the end of the series. Chad feels like a hanger-on in many ways, and because of this, where does that leave Chad? Well, it leaves him with only one role, and that's to become the yardstick for which enemy strength is measured. If Uryu is rising to prominence, and Kubo wants to use him more and more, he needs him to be around, which means somebody else has to take the fall, and that is always Chad. And Chad ends up in this cruel, vicious cycle, which we'll get into as we get into his plot overview, where he is teased with a power-up. You know, teased with this idea of, I'm back, Ichigo, you know, you think I'm not strong enough? I am, I'm here, only to get immediately destroyed again and go straight back to step one. And it's kind of fascinating because Uryu and Chad's development is very much mirrored up until about the Lost Agent arc, but that doesn't stop Uryu from being involved in Ichigo's pivotal moments. It does seem to stop Chad. And that lack of involvement pushes him out to the periphery. And that's something we'll really explore in this video. So I wanted to kind of just talk about that first of all, what I've called the Chad problem. And it is this growing lack of relevance. And it's kind of fascinating, really, because I think, you know, we recently did a video on Tessai Tsukubishi, the first of what I've called the Bleach Forgotten Characters kind of playlist. And Chad is absolutely not a forgotten character. It's just it's more Kubo doesn't know what to do with him and has no place for him, but feels a necessity to keep him involved because he is a main character. So it's really kind of fascinating, I think. It really is interesting to see an author struggle, I think, grapple with this character who he just doesn't know what to do with. But there is plenty to love about this character as well, and if we look at his appearance and his personality, Chad is once again another character who just looks awesome. He looks cool. Like, seriously, I love the way Chad looks. The really awesome nature of his backstory, that he's both Japanese and part Mexican as well, and so that influences his outward appearance, something he has been, savagely bullied about in the past, and that gives him something to relate to Ichigo about as well. Ichigo obviously is bullied ruthlessly throughout the years because of his natural orange hair, and Chad's darker complexion, his darker skin, has been something that he has been targeted about over the years. Not just his skin either, but his pretty massive stature in comparison to the rest of sort of the school kids and the gangs around. And I think that's really awesome. Chad immediately stands out. He's very recognizable. His kind of mess of hair where most of the time you can't see his eyes, that's a nice detail as well. And this only evolves as the series goes on. Chad's abilities again look completely unique, both his right even, and his left arms really stand out and look awesome. You can attribute those powers to Chad immediately the moment you see them. And as far as I'm concerned, Chad enormously benefits from the post-time skip as well. That tiny little bit of beard he has really helps push him up, make him look even more mature. He's already supposed to look way older than the rest of his friends, but he looks downright cool, I think, as far as the time skip goes, particularly when you first see him. Obviously, Kubo's sense of style as well really comes out with Chad, because he's able to make him look quite different from the rest of the cast. You have a cast who almost entirely consists of characters in uniform, whether that's the Shinigami, the Arrancar, the Vandenreich, all that sort of thing. Chad gets to stand out, Kubo gets to have a bit of flourish with how he looks, and he nearly always dresses impeccably. And I just think the character looks fantastic. His personality, sort of the gentle giant trope, not the first time we've seen this in fiction, but it works really well here. And like I said, his personality does stand out from the rest of his friendship group. Very, very quiet, often just sort of mutters or mumbles or even just grunts in approval, but it sort of became his thing, he was known for that. And it's amazing as well how much Kubo can get across with so little with Chad. I really do like that. And this whole, his name as well has the word tiger in it, so you get the idea, this quiet tiger, this, again, sort of a hidden badass thing that is really played up early on and then really peters out as the story goes, which is a big shame. But if there's one constant in Chad's character, it's that he cares deeply about his friends. Like I said, they are this group of misfits, but they have a really tight bond. And you do see that a lot with Chad, and that's potentially why it's a big shame that he's often completely taken out of the story arc so quickly, because I feel like he has such a lot to offer. But also, the character wants to fight, he wants to be of use, and that's probably the saddest part of all. So to kick off Chad's plot overview, like I said, despite minimal impact, he is in the story a lot, so this is probably going to last a while. So I will add timestamps to each separate arc. I think that's probably going to be the best way for people to navigate if they so wish. But obviously, with Chad, as he is one of the major characters, he does first appear in the Agent of the Shinigami Arc, the substitute Shinigami Arc, at the very start of the series, essentially. And his story, this arc is kind of episodic. It basically deals with different hollow stories, which eventually come round and tie in together, which results in them going to Soul Society. And Chad's story, it starts with the whole Yuichi Shibata thing, essentially. The cockatiel who's possessed by the spirit of the little boy who is being hounded by the monstrous hollow Shrieker. And although Chad has a burgeoning Reiatsu within him, he can't currently see hollows at this point in time, but you get a couple of nice moments. Chad's immense, immeasurable strength is shown off to comic effect here. Like, he catches a steel girder on his back despite being a regular human, rips a telephone pole out of the ground and uses it to bat Shrieker out of the sky. these are kind of cool moments. The series on the whole is a lot zanier back here than it would later become. Bleach becomes a lot more self-serious down the line. So these kind of moments are really nice and really help to establish Chad as just being this enormously physically powerful guy who barely says a thing. After this, Chad has a run-in with another hollow Bulbous G, which he actually fights alongside Ichigo's younger sister, Karin. Now, Karin, as we know throughout the story, has similar cognition to Ichigo. She can see ghosts. She can see Bulbous G in all his glory, and so she tag teams with Chad to bring down this hollow. And it's actually during this fight that Chad's powers awaken for the very first time. And it's actually during this fight that we get our very first glimpse of Chad's backstory. We find out that as a young, very young boy, he was quite troubled. You know, he has this bulk of a body. He's very tall, very physically imposing, and very powerful. And he was using his fists for all the wrong reasons. And we find out that it seems like he lives with his grandfather, who of course he affectionately calls his abuelo. I believe this man's name is Oscar Joaquin de la Rosa, but that could be totally wrong. I think that is right, though. And so his grandfather essentially says to him, you know, you shouldn't be using your fists in this way. You were given gifts by God that so many people would love to have, but you're using them wrong. You know, you're using them for violence. But these fists, this huge body you've been given, it should be used to protect, not to attack. And, you know, very similar kind of ideology, I guess, to Ichigo. They both share this same ideal that they should be protecting people all the time, which of course is ironic because the two of them get in so many fights as they grow up. But Chad takes on this kind of notion that he won't fight back. He won't fight, even as he's being ruthlessly bullied, he's being wailed on by these other people. He won't use his towering statuesque body to fight back, only to protect and defend. And it's a really nice moment, actually. Kind of, you get this hint that Chad's come from quite a troubled background, but he's come out of it the other side with a much better perspective than he had before. And yet now, in a moment of need, as Ichigo's sister is in great peril, Chad calls out to his fists, essentially. You know, he begs them to lend him a moment of power. He hasn't used them for so long. He's adhered to his abuelo's words, and now he needs them more than ever. He needs that strength that he has locked inside, and he smacks Bulbous G, basically kills him in a single hit, and you see finally he has that first arm of his, black and red, goes all the way up, this cool shoulder pad thing. He looks cool, and honestly, it is iconic. You know, no matter what you say about Chad, that first panel where he emerges from the dust with his new arm, he looks really, really cool, and it's just a really great moment overall. And of course, the fact that Chad kind of calls out to his arms, to his fists, would tie nicely back around to the Lost Agent arc much later on down the line. So Chad's kind of unlocked his powers now at about the same time as Orihime, and the two of them realise that they are meant for greater things, for a greater destiny. And they try and train with them a bit more, extending an offer to Uryu as well, who declines, and then eventually with Yoruichi as their mentor, they go to Soul Society alongside Ichigo to try and rescue Rukia. Now Chad doesn't really have any reason to rescue Rukia. He has barely interacted with her that much, but we find out later on his reason for doing so, and it really helps to shape him as a character. So moving quickly then into the Soul Society arc, we know of course that they are forced to divert away from the main gate. They meet up with Kukaku Shiba, she gets them into Soul Society, and they are immediately separated. There's a lovely moment where Chad kind of effectively sacrifices himself, grabs, because they're all in the sky, they blow up, and all of them are kind of shot in different directions, and Chad sort of grabs Uryu, throws him back into the rest of the group, and as he does so, he falls alone away from the others. Very selfless again, very caring. He's not really that friendly with Uryu yet at this point, but he also saves his life back in the Bankai as well. He manages to tear him free of the Kototsu, and Chad kind of spends the early part of the Soul Society arc wandering, looking for information about the Senzai Q, where he can find Rukia. There's a lovely moment where he has a recollection of his kind of initial meeting with Ichigo. They realise they're in the same school year. The name Chad comes from a colourful mispronunciation of his first name, Sado, by Ichigo, and Ichigo's like, well, wouldn't you rather be called Chad? It's a badass name. And I love that it just kind of stuck. It's a really nice moment between the two of them. As I mentioned earlier, of course, they are both misfits who would continue to get into more trouble as time goes on. Much later on than this, again, you find out as well that Chad is targeted by bullies, again, these gang members who threaten to destroy the coin that he was given by his grandfather, by his abuelo. And Ichigo arrives in a pretty legendary moment because Chad obviously won't fight back. And Ichigo, there's just a wonderful moment for Ichigo's character where he calls up the ambulance and he says, we're going to need this many ambulances for the amount of people he's about to beat up. And so it's just a lovely forming of this bond where Chad, because Ichigo has helped him out in such a dire situation where something so precious to Chad was on the line, he always agrees from this point on to have his back. But there's another nice moment where Chad ends up running into members of the 11th Division, of course, the surly, brutal fighting division of the Gotei 13, and he's kind of just trying to get answers, like I said. He's beating people up left, right, and centre. He threatens this one guy, like, where's the Senzai Q? And the guy tells him, and Chad just sort of says, like, thanks, and then just walks off. It's a really nice moment. The guy then tries to strike him from behind, but Chad just bends his armpit toe, and he's like, don't do that again. And Chad is portrayed as a badass. In case you haven't realised so far, these are early days, but Chad is portrayed as something of a straight badass. He's supposed to come across as unstoppable. There's a lovely image of him emerging from the smoke, again, just looking almost Terminator-esque in how difficult it is for these guys to stop him. And this reaches its apex when he arrives in the 8th Division and meets their third seat, Tatsufasa N. Joji, who's a massive show-off, does this whole pathetic routine where he's like screaming at the top of his head, trying to do this dance to like intimidate Chad, but Chad just wipes him out in a single hit. But we would never have realised, we could never have imagined as readers how out of his depth Chad would suddenly become. Because of course, up next, Chad runs into the captain of the 8th Division, Kyoraku Shunsui. At this point, Kyoraku was not my favourite captain, and I had absolutely no idea how monstrously powerful this guy would become. And truly, Chad came up against both the best and the worst opponent he could have possibly asked for. The best because Kyoraku was never going to kill him, which again is not something we knew back then. But the worst because the power gap could almost not be bigger. There's maybe only Yamamoto and Unohana at this point in the story who are actually stronger than Kyoraku, so Chad gets it pretty bad. And Eyes as well, I guess, but you're supposed to think he's dead. So this is a fight that I think is slept on a bit by the fan base. I think it's actually pretty interesting. Now, obviously, most of the time, Kyoraku is just toying with him. He barely even moves. He's drinking his sake. He bats away Chad's energy blasts like they're nothing. But it's a good, enjoyable fight, I think. Kubo's already mixing the serene with the sinister with Kyoraku. You get amazing panels of him. And Chad being like, trying to be respectable. Chad's quite a respectful guy, and he says, I'm sorry, Mr. Captain, but I have to get through. And if you don't move, I'll make you. And Kyoraku, there's just a wonderful moment where Chad says, like, I have to get through. Will you let me pass? And then Kyoraku just sort of like looks up from his drink and he's like, if I say no. And it's just so good because they're both these kind of characters who have I think what's key here is neither of them have ill intent in their heart. Neither of them even really want to fight that much, but Chad has a mission he must complete. And of course, Kyoraku is probably the most perceptive captain out there, so he realises that. He understands Chad's passion. He asks Chad, why are you doing this? You couldn't have even spent that much time with Rukia because she was barely in the human world. And Chad's like, yeah, you're right. I don't even really know Rukia. But I'm putting my life on the line because Ichigo is. It's that important to Ichigo that it's that important to me. It's just great. It's so good stuff. Chad firmly is, at this point in the story, Ichigo's best friend. He has his back. He has his best interests at heart. And Kyoraku understands this, and he knows, therefore, the only way to stop Chad, because he does have to stop him, is to put him down. The end of their fight is wonderful. Looking back, it's scary. You know, no one in Ichigo's close friend group had suffered any kind of a defeat like this yet. This was new territory. You know, Chad lunges for Kyoraku, but Kyoraku's already past him. You know, the difference in their skill was a gap that could never have been breached. And Kyoraku just says, you know, I'm sorry. And you just see Chad explode with blood, like explode with blood as he hits the ground. Ichigo and his friends are horrified. They sense that Chad is gone. They sense he's disappeared. And they're like, he can't be dead. You know, surely he can't be dead. And as readers, this was new territory for us. We thought Chad might be dead. You know, he's literally hit the floor, blood everywhere. You know, the captain in question has just apologized. So you're like, oh my God, you know, what's going on here? Like I mentioned as well, if you're watching this video and you've read the whole series, you're probably coming at this character from a position of cynicism, because I know I would be, because we know where Chad ends up. But put yourself in the shoes of yourself reading this for the first time again. This was a huge deal. Chad had, like I said, had been painted as a serious badass up until now, and now it looks like he might be dead. And that was a really big moment. Of course, it's revealed he's not dead. There's still a glimmer of himself in there. He's still alive. And he's eventually put in prison where he reunites with the entire gang. It is amazing going back and seeing that difference. And Chad is one of these characters who is always hinted at being very powerful, but then Kubo just never lets him follow through. With Kyoraku, Chad tries to land one massive final blast, only for him to miss. But Kyoraku himself is like, damn, I'm glad that didn't hit me. Everything is an if with Chad. If he'd hit me, if it had landed, it would have been a big deal, and we don't ever get to see it. But that's pretty much it for Chad in the Soul Society arc. He, like I said, is later freed from prison by Kenpachi, and he witnesses Ichigo defeating Byakuya and Aizen's ascension to Hueco Mundo, and then he returns home. And unfortunately for Chad, we arrive at the Arrancar arc, where the systematic destruction of his character begins, in my opinion anyway. Up until now, his reputation was mostly still intact, but things would go downhill very quickly. The first really tough moment for Chad arrives when the Espada themselves arrive in Karakura town, and Chad tries to defend Orihime, Tatsuki, etc. from Yami, the 10th Espada, and to say it doesn't go well would be an understatement. Chad barely fights Yami. Yami just seems to pluck his arm off with very little difficulty. Extremely gruesome, very graphic. Chad's arm is just wrecked. He looks like he could be dead, and he barely puts up a fight. And if I'm completely honest with you, I don't buy it. I don't think Yami is anywhere near that much more powerful than Chad. Yami, at this point, should theoretically be pretty much at his weakest point in the series. He gets manhandled by everyone who then comes afterwards. And it's so weird to me that Chad is just instantly defeated without any kind of a fight, and his body is ripped to pieces. And I think the only reasonable explanation for this is Kubo wanted to hype up the new bad guys, and this is the first, and certainly not the last, moment where Chad would simply just be used for that. It feels like when he lost to Kyoraku, there was a bit more to it than that. It held a bit more weight, a bit more gravity. But against Yami, it's superficial. It's just so Kubo can be like, be scared of these new bad guys. Look, they got Chad. Chad's now nearly dead. And that's the only role he has. Now, while this is a bad moment for Chad, it's not his lowest moment, which in my opinion comes next. The Arrancar arc's so good to Chad. But basically, after being healed, Grimjo and the others are arriving in Karakura town to kill Ichigo and his friends, and Chad's like, I have to help. He emerges out onto the street and is nearly immediately killed by the Fraction D. Roy Rinka, who basically just nearly kills Chad in a single hit. He appears right in front of him, tries to stab him in the heart, and Ichigo grabs his wrist. As Chad himself says, if Ichigo hadn't been there, he probably would have died, and he just appears immediately and is nearly killed after being healed. It's a hard moment, it's really tough for Chad, and it's quite emotional for readers as well to see this, I think. And I actually really like the development here. Ichigo kind of says to Chad, and they don't look at each other either, it's quite a cold moment, but Ichigo's like, Chad, you know, get out of here, you need to be safe, go on and leave, I can handle this. And Chad's like protesting, no, Ichigo, you know, I can fight alongside you, and he's clutching his arm, he's like, I've been healed. And Ichigo's like, Chad, please go. And Chad takes off, and it's sad, it's really sad, because Chad's like, what's happening, Ichigo? Don't you trust me to have your back anymore? And he's like, you know, are we ever going to be able to fight on the same... Are we going to be able to fight together again, Ichigo? Or is that way behind us? And it's a really powerful moment, I think. It's a great moment of development for this character, who, like I said, in the Soul Society arc was built up as a badass, who could always have Ichigo's back, and now the power gap between them has grown to the point where Chad himself is having this moment of realization. You know, in a series where the main character is guaranteed to absolutely balloon in strength and leave his closest allies behind, I think this is a really interesting way of showcasing that, of having one of his closest allies grapple with the fact that they might not be anywhere near as powerful anymore. And this whole idea of Chad coming to terms with not being able to have Ichigo's back, it's really good stuff. Like I said, almost all of the main cast of Karakura guys are going through some kind of emotional turmoil in the Arrancar arc, and with Chad, it's really about feeling inadequate next to his former fighting partner. Unfortunately, if I had to be totally honest, I think this is where Chad's character stagnates. It reaches a point of stagnation that it frankly never gets out of again. Chad's character suffers from a vicious cycle from this point moving forwards, where he pledges to get stronger, he gets viciously beaten down, and then he pledges to get stronger again, desperate to not be a burden and yet always doomed to be. And it's really, really sad. Chad does a bit of training with Renji and Kisuke, and then pledges to head to Hueco Mundo alongside Ichigo and Uryu to save Orihime. And there's a moment here, a slightly strange moment, where Kubo seemed to want to dispel the notion that Chad wasn't going to be able to keep up with Ichigo anymore, like he'd resolved that plot point. Ichigo's like, you know, I have to go alone, the enemies in there are going to be ruthless and dangerous, and Chad like throws a punch at him, which Ichigo blocks, and he's like, am I still too weak, Ichigo, or can I fight alongside you again? I've been training, and Ichigo allows him to go with him, and you're supposed to think that Chad has reached this next level that never really seems to come. Now, unlike with Rukia, I can actually really see Chad wanting to rescue Orihime because they are really close friends, and actually their relationship is one of my favourite in the series in terms of the smaller relationships, very much the periphery relationships. I really like it, and I think Kubo does a great job of showing how these two kind of oddball characters work really well together, and they're actually seen together more often than you might think. But our heroes arrive in Hueco Mundo, and Chad quickly shows off his strength by helping defeat the Arrancar Demora Zod. This is another great moment. It's a good fight. I like that Chad struggles initially against Ice Stinger, but then he swaps opponents with Uryu, and together they're able to easily defeat the enemies. But this is, of course, exactly what I mean when Kubo writes Chad in this way. He gets destroyed by D-Roy, pledges to get stronger, which is the moment before they arrive in Hueco Mundo, and now we're seeing him back to being a straight badass again, calmly and quickly dispatching of Demora, and you're like, yes, Chad's clearly very powerful. But of course, these Arrancar are absolute nobodies in terms of the grand scheme of things. Chad plays a mostly background role here until they all split off and separate to go and find Orihime, and he runs into Ganten Bane Mosqueda, one of the Privaron Espada who was demoted from his original rank, but is clearly still quite powerful, and this is of course probably Chad's crowning moment in the series. Their fight is fairly even, but Chad unlocks numerous new abilities in this one battle thanks to a tease about the origin of his powers. His strength is greater here in Hueco Mundo because his abilities are similar to that of Hollows. He gains this massive shield on his right arm, which looks really awesome, a nice natural transformation of that power, which is called the right arm of the giant, or brazo derecha del gigante, or something like that. But that's really cool. But then during the rest of the fight, he gains another new ability against Gantenbane, where he claims that the right arm of his is for defending, but the left arm is for attacking. Brazo izquierda del diablo, or the left arm of the devil. And it all looks great, it all looks really cool. The left arm in particular looks awesome. I love the white and the red design, it's very cool. And he very quickly puts down Gantenbane with La Muerte, which is probably Chad's coolest moment in the series, I think, arguably, but it is pretty awesome. I love the attack in general. I like how he gets these glowing lights on his fingertips, curls it together, punches him in the stomach, and this massive skull appears in the crack behind Gantenbane. It's just really cool. So we've seen Chad take down 2 people in a row, including a somewhat pretty powerful enemy, but if you thought that Chad had escaped his vicious cycle, you were wrong. Because pretty much the moment he steps foot outside, he's confronted by the 5th Espada, Noitora Girga, who takes him out in a single hit. Basically, just wipes him out immediately. Chad runs at him, Noitra slices him, and Chad goes down. Now, of course, this isn't overly fair. Chad has just had a pretty brutal fight against Gantenbane. He's probably pretty tired, but Noitra takes him out regardless. And once again, we get a near beat-for-beat repeat of what happens in the Soul Society arc. Everyone's like, oh no, Chad's down. Chad's the first one to go down again. Which is a little bit sad. It is a bit of a shame, because Bleach already came under fire at this point for essentially repeating the main storyline of the first arc, where one of the girls is kidnapped, they have to infiltrate the enemy base. And now the exact same plot beats are happening. Chad is the first to fall again. And you'll notice that it has considerably less impact this time. You know, there's only so many times Chad can fall to the ground and Ichigo can be like, no, Chad's not gone, he's still alive. And it's like, obviously he's still alive. The first time with Kyoraku, there was call for maybe he is dead. Not so much this time. It's pretty clear that that effect has worn off. Of course, Chad does get back to his feet and tries to attack Noitra again, as I mentioned, but Tessera blocks it, and Chad collapses. He is later healed by Unohana, however, and we then see him when the main group reconvenes as Ichigo is headed to face Ulquiorra to save Orihime. Chad helps fight the Exequias, and it's a pretty nice moment. Chad gives Ichigo his trademark thumbs up to kind of let him know that everything's good, and I do like that the two of them, I feel like that's Kubo's way of trying to hammer home that they are still best friends by having this unspoken kind of knowledge between the two of them that everything's okay. And then to round up the Arrancar arc, we have the fake Karakura town arc, and Chad's role in this is so laughably diminished that the anime itself expands on it massively through filler, because he basically does nothing during this time in the manga, which is what we are looking at. After helping Ichigo reach Ulquiorra, Chad takes out a couple of random hollows, only to be confronted by Yami again as he arrives from the tower where Ichigo is facing Ulquiorra. Chad, Rukia, and Renji then decide to take Yami on, believing him to be the 10th Espada and therefore the weakest, but Yami reveals himself to actually be the 0 Espada, and therefore the one he claims the strongest, but really it's just the one who has the most Reiatsu. And this is just such an awful, it's just such a bad moment, and I've talked about it before, how Chad, Rukia, and Renji were robbed in this moment. Particularly Chad, because at least Rukia has killed an Espada and Renji has fought an Espada. But this was the perfect moment for Chad to get revenge on Yami for what happened to him at the start of the arc, to really show that actually he has improved in strength. And sure, maybe he's not strong enough to take on the 5th Espada, but the 10th? Easy pickings. But Chad is immediately put into the ground. The next time you see him, he is face down on the floor. And I have to tell you as well, that if you were there when this was coming out weekly, one of the longest running jokes that absolutely exploded during this moment was this joke pairing of Chad and the ground. I remember it so well. Chad just... This was the point where he was a laughing stock. And it's kind of sad. But he just gets taken out so many times in the series. And it's to the point where it no longer has any impact. What point is it serving at this point to have Chad so easily destroyed? It completely invalidates any training he might have had prior to this arc to see Kubo just cut back to Chad and he's face down on the ground again. Brilliant. Any development he had is completely scrapped. Any prospects he had are basically scrapped. All in service of what? Basically showing us Kenpachi and Byakuya for the 11th time. And yeah, it sucks. I truly think Chad, Rukia, and Renji, their combined powers should have been enough to bring Yami down. Especially when it's shown that Yami is still a walking, talking joke. He still gets wrecked. And I appreciate that 2 captains are stronger than the 3 of them. But Byakuya also basically does nothing in this fight, so really it's just Kenpachi. So I truly think that Chad, Rukia, and Renji could have, should have, and would have done more, and should have been allowed to. And so we have the Lost Agent arc, which is probably the weirdest one in the series, but Kubo makes a concerted effort here, at least at the beginning, to redeem Chad, to give him back his prominent place at the forefront of the story as Ichigo's best friend. Even saying that this arc is Chad's arc. It became a bit of a thing around this time, particularly as we were moving into the 1,000-Year Blood War arc, for Kubo to denote that each arc belonged to someone else. The Soul Society arc was Rukia, Arrancar arc was Orihime, Lost Agent was Chad, and the 1,000-Year Blood War was Uryu. But to call this arc Chad's arc is a massive insult, because really, he suffers again from the exact same vicious cycle we have seen him going through up until now. But it's not all doom and gloom, because he does play a serviceably good role for about the first 2/3 of this arc, as Ichigo's kind of main man once again. Uryu is very quickly incapacitated by Tsukishima and Ginjo, and this gives Chad more room to breathe. You know, like Chad, again, as I said, has had no part to play in the biggest moments of Ichigo's life. At the end of the Arrancar arc, that dome moment is so critical, and Chad spends it passed out on the floor. But now Ichigo has lost his powers, and Chad is ready to help him get them back again. You get lovely character moments here where Chad is so brutally honest with Ichigo in the way a lot of characters aren't. And he basically says, you know, I can't bear to look at you since you lost your powers. You've been moping, you've lost your passion for protecting people, and I'll help you get it back. And that's really nice to see. Also, we get confirmation about what Chad actually is. He's a full bringer, and those powers do indeed stem from Hollow Reiatsu. And Chad takes an active role in Ichigo's full bring training from this point on, working with the guys from Execution. The moment where Ichigo is fighting in round 1 of his training and Chad rips the box open where Ichigo is, and he helps him understand the basis of how full bring works, how it works based on pride and attachment, and how Ichigo should feel great pride of his days as a substitute Shinigami. And Chad felt pride in the skin colour he has, in his arms, his fists, that strength he has, and that helped create his full bring, which is a nice callback to that moment with Bulbous G, like I mentioned. That works really well. And Ichigo, thanks to that, is able to unlock his full bring powers for the first time. And Chad spends the rest of the arc, at least for the next third of the arc, working as almost like a mediator between Ginjo and the Execution lot and Ichigo, Orihime, etc., talking on separate occasions with both Ichigo and Orihime, but electing to keep Ichigo mostly in the dark. However, again, if you thought that Chad was free of his vicious cycle, he is not. Because we get the next moment where Chad decides he's going to once again train to not be a burden to Ichigo. He gets this fancy room made up for him by Yukio with perfect training conditions to make him stronger than he is now. Couple that with Orihime's speech about how they will not hold Ichigo back, and you are in the exact same place you were at the start of Hueco Mundo with Chad as a character. And he's, again, nothing to show for it. I think many of us were very surprised to see that Chad had no extra abilities, no new forms. I think many of us, perhaps optimistically, wanted him to get a full suit of armor or something. But he has no growth after this. He doesn't change. Like I said, and I'm not wrong, his character has effectively stagnated from a motivation perspective back in the D-Roy scene. From a power scene, it stagnates from Gantenbane and never gets any better than that. And that is really sad for a supposed main character. And unfortunately for Chad, his role in the finale of this arc that's supposed to be his, is a big disappointment, I think anyway. Now, it's not from the beginning. I actually really like the emotional tug of the fight between Ichigo and Chad and Orihime. Tsukishima has successfully, warped their minds, essentially, and now they are fighting Ichigo himself. It's really powerful stuff, really good stuff. But before the actual finale can take place, they are taken out of the arc completely. And that's a big disappointment to me, because a part of me does feel like Kubo just wanted them gone so the Shinigami could take the focus and take the centre stage for the big final battle against Execution. And for an arc that Chad has seemingly had so much to do in, it is a shame. He is just knocked out and then not in the fight anymore. And once again, you-know-who resumes his position as Ichigo's main man, Uryu. Uryu is the one who has Ichigo's back in the final battle against Ginjo. But outside of being attacked by Ginjo, Uryu has had nothing to do with this guy. It would have been so much better if Chad had been involved. And I think you can easily twist it so that there is a way to make that happen. You can have a different ending to this arc, where Chad is fully involved in helping Ichigo bring Ginjo down. And that would have just solved so much, I think. That would have shown that he has grown, he still has Ichigo's back, he's turned against the guy he thought was a friend, Ginjo, and actually has a demonstrable effect on the outcome of this arc. And so we finally come to the 1,000-year Blood War arc, and this video is already pretty long, as I knew it would be, and I'm grateful then that Chad has virtually nothing to do in this arc, and it's the truth. Now again, as I mentioned earlier, Chad is not a forgotten character. He shows up throughout basically this entire story arc, and does nothing, absolutely nothing. He has no fights, he has no character arc of any real description, because I'm guessing at this point he's basically just given up on being Ichigo's right-hand guy. He's given up on being the one who has Ichigo's back. And Chad has no real emotional involvement even in the Uryu betrayal storyline, because when you have a group of friends, there's always two friends who, if you left them alone in a room, they wouldn't really know what to say to each other. That is Uryu and Chad. And so Chad doesn't feel that same, I don't think anyway, you don't get the sense that Chad has that same emotional connection to Uryu that the others do, that Ichigo and Orihime are devastated by his supposed betrayal. But anyway, back to the start of the arc, and Chad and Ichigo, Orihime, etc. go to Hueco Mundo at the first sign of this invasion. They go to help Dondochaka, and of course there's the big fight with Kyuuge Opi. And it frustrates me to kind of go back, and Chad does nothing in this battle. Absolutely nothing. Why is he doing nothing? Ichigo is throwing himself into battle against this Stern Ritter. The Arrancar are fighting the Stern Ritter. Orihime has a reason not to fight. Ichigo has given her Nell to look after, but Chad does nothing. Like, he literally stands there just watching the fight. He could have thrown a couple of punches, sent an El Directo towards Kyuuge or something. He doesn't even help fight the Quincy soldiers that show up. And I almost feel like Kubo himself probably realised it was too far gone, the whole storyline. Ichigo is now ludicrously overpowered in comparison to Chad. And to the point where Chad doesn't even bother interfering in a fight with... He could have easily had Ichigo's back here against Kyuuge. He doesn't do it. And that really sucks. The only thing Chad does do is after Kyuuge gets back on his feet, he tries to defend Urahara and Orihime, but is punched full of holes by the arrows instead. It's the first of many kind of disappointments for Chad, I think. Well, not even disappointments, he just doesn't do anything. It's completely flat, he doesn't do anything in this arc. There is a nice subplot of Chad and Orihime and Urahara setting up shop in Hueco Mundo, this really cool idea that they have a string of bases out there. Chad ends up meeting Orihime at this place called the Neagle Ruins, where they do some training. And again, you get the pointless Chad training scene, where he and Orihime are apparently training in the desert, the sands of Hueco Mundo, with presumably characters like Grimjo, Neliel, maybe even Yukio and Riruka after they show up, but you never see any of it. And that's also not really Chad's fault. A lot of these hidden characters are in Hueco Mundo, and Kubo wanted to keep a lot of that a surprise. But, Chad is supposed to be training with Orihime. Don't ever expect to see the results of it, because you just don't. But then they do later show up during the climactic part of the second invasion, where Ichigo is facing off against Uryu, and they all kind of come together to plan their assault on the royal palace. It is nice. They throw in Yoroichi and Ganju for even more of that Soul Society nostalgia, and it is cool to see them all coming together. But genuinely, I can breeze through most of this stuff. Chad does get something of an honour, however. He goes to the royal palace with Ichigo and the others. He actually gets to lay eyes on the Soul King in his cocoon state and everything like that, which is kind of weird. The Schutzstaffel arrive, and Chad sort of readies his fists, but they don't fight. He just falls off the building with Ichigo and the others. And then they make one kind of last-ditch assault on Varvelt after it becomes that. And again, I just don't really know why Kubo goes the route he goes with this character. Now, before they get to Varvelt, there is a nice moment where Chad shows that maybe he has a deeper understanding of Uryu than we thought he might, which is after Ichigo is, very depressed about Uryu presumably joining Yhwach, and Chad sort of picks him up and throws him, and he has like a heart-to-heart with him about Uryu and how he must have had a reason for going. He's very smarter than you and I, and that is a nice moment. It's really the only moment Chad gets to properly say or do anything of consequence. He manages to knock some sense back into Ichigo, after which they then elect to go to the palace together. Now, the final part of Bleach itself, essentially, is this assault into Varvelt. Chad is obviously a part of Ichigo's gang. And like I said, Chad is hanging around. He's not been forgotten, but he's not doing anything. Now, the next bit is quite cool, however. Askin has managed to incapacitate Ichigo. Chad leaps at him, punches the ground. Askin manages to dodge it. And then Chad is immediately, because why not, incapacitated by Gift Bad, the poison pool. And it's so insane to think, but Chad jumping and throwing that punch at Askin, it's about the only offensive thing he does in this entire story arc. And if Ichigo had been incapacitated by Askin, why wouldn't Chad throw a ranged attack at him instead if he thought getting close to him was dangerous? I don't know, because Kubo's not really thinking about this character at this point. Chad gets back on his feet, goes with Ichigo and carries on, and then the next part is this part that people just laughed at, where they kind of get close to the throne room, and these Quincy statues come to life, and they try and attack Ichigo and the others, and Chad blocks them with his shield. I guess it's a cool moment for Chad to have right at the end of the series, but they're statues. They're not even characters. And I remember people very, very optimistically hoping, praying that maybe there was an unknown Quincy behind this, that maybe Chad and Ganju were going to face off against a new Sternritter, maybe Hashwolf's maid that we had never seen again was controlling these statues, but it's literally an army of faceless statues that Kubo has just given Chad to fight, because he has nothing else for him to do. And this is again another moment that I just kind of question, why didn't Kubo just have Chad go with Ichigo and Orihime to fight Yhwach? What's so wrong about Chad that he had to be taken out of the series like this? Chad doesn't have to be the one who defeats Yuha. Just at least give him the honour of being there. Orihime gets her big character arc moment where she's like, I can finally fight alongside Ichigo, I'm no longer a burden. This is the culmination of everything she's had up until now. Kisuke not letting her fight in the Arrancar arc, her witnessing Ichigo's death and being unable to do anything about it, her being more mature and wanting to train and fight with him in the Fullbring arc. And we get to this point where she's now going to take on the big boss. Chad doesn't get any resolution like that. Chad gets nothing. And Chad's the one who needs the resolution more than Orihime ever did, at least I think anyway. Because Chad has had this vicious cycle. The vicious cycle is not really here in the 1,000-Year Blood War because he doesn't do anything. I mean, I guess it kind of is. He trains in the Neagle Ruins and is instantly defeated by Askin. So, yeah, I guess it kind of is there. And so Chad saying that he and Ganju are going to clear the way for Ichigo, that's it. That's the end of him in the 1,000-Year Blood War. We get the epilogue, and the epilogue as well is just so... The epilogue is very questionable, I think, because it feels to me like Kubo actually did lose sight of what this character was all about. So in the epilogue, obviously, it's 10 years after the defeat of Yuha himself. The characters are mostly grown up, they have families, they have kids, they have jobs. And the only thing, you only see Chad for like 2 panels. And they're watching him on TV, because he's now a professional boxer, and, you're already seeing that this is just weird. Chad's now a world championship boxer. Okay, he's in the title fight. His friends are all watching him. There's a lovely moment where Uryu has taken an extended lunch break to watch him fight, but we're forgetting the main crux of the issue here. The whole basis of Chad's character was that he wouldn't use his fists for fighting, for his own gain. He would only use them to defend, and now apparently he is getting fame and fortune by fighting in very unfair circumstances. These people don't stand a chance against Chad. Chad could win every fighting tournament in the world at this point. Chad might be incredibly weak in the Bleach universe, or not even that weak, but just outclassed. But he's a god compared to normal human beings. They don't stand a chance. Chad must beat these people in like one hit. And so in that sense, the very end of Chad's story feels like a betrayal of what Chad was all about. Very weird. I do kind of wonder if Chad becoming a boxer is just supposed to be a fun callback to that Bleach anime ending where he is a boxer and he's punching Zamari in the face. Maybe that's all it is, but does feel like his character arc was not only not really completed, but unless that's supposed to be his character resolution and that he's now comfortable to use his fists in situations that kind of have gain for him. I don't know. Just like Kubo kind of completely gives up with this character, we've reached the end of Chad's story and I'm a bit like, there's not much here. He gets a cool new outfit. That is something that happens in the 1,000-Year Blood War arc. He does get a cool new outfit. I do like the coat. He does look a bit strange, but I do like it. It's just a shame he doesn't get to do anything while he's wearing it. So that's the end of Chad's pretty massive plot overview. I tell you what, I'm not looking forward to getting around to some of the more major characters. Videos like Ichigo might have to be in 2 parts. But I hope it was enjoyable nonetheless. And I hope, we got to talk a bit more about Chad, get a bit deeper into this character. And the unfortunate writing circumstances Kubo puts him in, this vicious cycle. It is a shame because I do think his relationships with characters like Ichigo are truly very enjoyable, and I love the past they have together. I love this idea of Chad feeling so distraught about not having Ichigo's back anymore. And then you should build on that, but it never really happens, and so that is a big shame to me. But that is pretty much it for Sado Yasutora, or Chad, one of the main characters of Bleach and one of Ichigo's closest allies. Let me know in the comments below what you thought of Chad in the Bleach manga. Are you as disappointed as I am in the trajectory of this guy's character? When you go back and look at the Soul Society arc in particular, he does start out as such a badass, and then after that, something goes seriously wrong. And maybe Kubo just fell out of favour with the character. I think that's possible. I think it's doable for an author to suddenly realise, maybe I don't really like this character that much anymore, or I don't find them that interesting. I think it's very clear that Kubo ended up vastly preferring Uryu as a character. And obviously the fans did as well, so that might have influenced his decision-making a bit. And in some ways, I commend Kubo for at least trying to give Chad some prominence again in the Lost Agent arc, but it's all completely undone by the end, and he's reduced to a literal spectator by the Thousand Year Blood War. So that is a real shame, but there is a lot to like about Chad. Cool design, great powers, awesome looking abilities, all that sort of thing. Really nice backstory with Ichigo. It's just he's very underutilized in the main story. Alright guys, but I hope you enjoyed this extraordinarily long video. Please let me know in the comments below what you like about Chad, what you don't like about Chad, and also what is your favourite Chad moment in Bleach. And until next time guys, I'll catch you later. Don't forget to subscribe if you haven't done already. Until next time, I'll see you then. Goodbye.